Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. If you say it the proper way, it's good morning rather than good morning, which is the good morning. You got it. You got it. You got it. So we've got a little bit of a restricted time slot, just because of the wonderful session with Chelsea. So that's good. But that means we're going to be a little bit tighter on our time this morning, which will mean probably a little bit less interaction, if that's okay with you. But if you want to try to talk to me about something later on, then please feel free. I apologize for the two big pillars in the room. So if you're sitting behind a pillar, you won't be able to see the screen. And the screen is probably more important than me. So I suggest you kind of move to a couple of seats here, a couple of seats over there. If you're near the pillar, get out of the way. Make sure it doesn't obstruct your view. So I was asked specifically if I could help you think about how to empower enterprise and develop a mentality around business partnerships with a perspective about the rest of the world as compared to the United States. In other words, how you could take the leverage that you enjoy, because I think it would be fair, looking around the thousands of people in the hall this morning, that you may well know and represent and come from less advantaged communities in the US, but you're not less advantaged yourselves. I think that'd be a fair comment. Yeah, fair. And I think that then lays on all of us the opportunity to make a real difference to the most extremely poor in the world. I often say to people in the UK who tell me how difficult life is, and let's not ever undermine the toughness of surviving on low incomes or without necessary resource, but make a comparison to somebody who has no electricity, no sanitation, has not had schooling, doesn't have shoes in which to walk, can't turn a tap on and get water, can't flick a switch and get power. You know, make a comparison to the reality of 2 billion people who still live like that in the world, and then you begin to realize how advantaged you are. No matter how disadvantaged you feel you are, you're still very advantaged. And we have to have a perspective which takes us forward to understanding what we can do. Now, I'm sure many of you will have noticed that on September the 25th last year, the United Nations, 198 nations of the world, agreed these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Just take a look at them for a minute. They are challenging, demanding, and possible. These 17 development goals, the last one on partnerships, are intended to move the world from a position where we still have people living in the kind of conditions I described, the extremely poor, to move to a position by 2030 where there is nobody left on the planet who can still hang the label over their head, $1.50 a day. That extreme poverty needs to come to an end. And the truth is, and we'll come on to the detail a lot later, the truth is that the greatest area of the largest need in our world is still sub-Saharan Africa. And I would argue for you, who many of you would describe yourselves as African Americans, that there is an opportunity as well as a duty that falls on African Americans with a heritage related to the continent of Africa, where the numbers of people in extreme poverty have actually increased in the last 20 years from roughly around 220 million people to a roughly around 414 million people out of a continent of 800 million people. Those numbers have gone up, and that's according to World Bank data. So that's just not NGOs who feeling that they want to make an axe point, but that's according to independent data. Here is the ring of thinking which Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, said for him was the motivating force behind driving these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. It is that dignity and the end of poverty are closely interconnected. And that's something that the Hope Forum believes very substantially. It's something that John has preached and sought to practice consistently that dignity and the end of poverty are absolutely interconnected. And these great ambitions around empowerment and prosperity and justice and partnership require that number one economic objective to be most powerfully met. Now, you'll know that there were the Millennium Development Goals. They were agreed in the year 2000. They ran from the year 2000 to 2015. They were 8 target objectives that set out, and here's the critical figure, set out to halve the number of people in our planet living on less than $2 a day. And the truth is that objective was reached. But if you halve the numbers living on $2 a day, that still means you've got a half left. You get it? That's simple maths. And that other half is the other half that we've really got to tackle in the next 15 years. Those Millennium Development Goals, those 8 Millennium Development Goals, did deal with things like primary or initial education. But they never dealt with secondary or high school education. They also never dealt with the standards of education. So it's one thing for a child to go to school, it's quite another thing for them to learn to read and excel at reading. Going to school doesn't mean you come out with an education. It may just mean you've been somewhere and had lunch. And what's necessary is to think about the quality of education and also the continuity of education. So the Sustainable Development Goals take us on from the Millennium Development Goals. Of the 8 targets, 2000 to 2015, the one that was the most difficult to meet of all, and I say that with such a large number of women here in the room, was the target on maternal health. And that target on maternal health was to ensure that no child dies in the presence of a mother who's birthing within an environment of poverty, and no mother dies within childbirth, but those figures continue to remain exceptionally and uncomfortably high. And that's largely to do with inadequate international health systems, particularly for women who go into pregnancy and go into labor in environments where there are no adequate maternal care facilities. So that is a stigma on the Millennium Development Goals, but overall, they were achieved. But remember, they were only achieved for half the objective. And a lot of people in the world said, wow, look, China's getting rich. And it is. It really is. Seriously is. If you haven't been, I imagine many of you haven't been and seen how transformed China is from the bicycling society to the empowered billionaire society that it is now. The fight between which is the largest economy between the US and China is a neck-and-neck fight. And it is neck and neck. It's only going to be a matter of time before China's GDP capability outpaces the US altogether. And the argument's over. And China's military capability is currently, in numbers terms, stronger than the United States. So we're facing a massive geopolitical shift that is taking place. And India is going through similar modernization and progression, as is so much of Southeast Asia. But that part of the world that remains to a significant step unaffected, despite growth rates in some cases across the continent of Africa at between 6 and 8% a year, despite those growth rates, are the growing population in the continent. And that is an area that we've got to focus our attention. So let's have a look at this very interesting video produced by the filmmaker who made 4 Weddings and a Funeral and Love Actually. And he produced this for the Sustainable Development Goals event in New York that took place in September. It's a fascinating minute and a half. I know you'll love it.
Apollo, you're on course. 226 hours to the moon orbit.
Okay, thanks, Houston. But I think we'll be heading back now.
Come again?
Yeah, it was kind of fun, but I think halfway will do. Job done.
Good night.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
It's good encouragement, isn't it? But here's the reality. So there are the figures. You read them for yourself. Now, when you see the figures like that and you see the facts, it's quite sobering. When you put it into perspective, no matter how tough things are here at home, it ain't that bad compared to how people are living elsewhere, particularly when they're linked to our own point of heritage. I don't know if you've been watching the flow of migration into Europe. If you've been seeing that, it's not just the multitudes of Syrians escaping the crisis in Syria and therefore swapping across from Turkey to Greece and fighting their way up through Macedonia and getting up ultimately to Austria and then to Germany and then up to Sweden. That's one side of the passage of new migrants who've come into Europe literally in the course of the last year. But you can look on Twitter at a migration map that shows, interestingly, that people as far down as Niger, which is just above Nigeria, and Guinea-Bissau, which is tucked to one end of Nigeria, are fighting their way up through the desert sands and paying the traffickers to get them across the Mediterranean and towards the Italian and French coasts. And Europe is facing this mass migration movement that no economist ever predicted. Nobody sat there at the World Economic Forum 2 years ago or in the White House and said this was going to happen. But it is happening. And the reason it is happening is partly because, and the figures were released as you saw there, partly because the extensive impacts of climate change are eroding many of the farmlands of traditional agricultural workers in Central Africa, and therefore there is no hope, no livelihoods, and the once forgotten Ethiopian famine of 1984 is back. So people are on the move just for survival. Syrians are on the move for political reasons. Africans are on the move for basic survival. And those numbers will only increase substantially. But there's another factor to it, which is the more that people who are poor are empowered through digital technology to look at the lives of the empowered, the more they think it's unfair. And they're heading our way. And when they're heading our way, and you're going to get them too, when they're heading our way, you know, it's one thing to have a, dare I make a US political observation, to have a presidential candidate who wants to lock everybody south of New Mexico somehow down in destitution. But they're going to come here. You know, walls are breachable. Barriers are breakable. Boundaries will always be crossed. People are heading our way. So there is a kind of, we have to do something about it from the sheer instinct of protection. But we need to do something about it from the moral responsibility and the economic opportunity of providing equality, justice, and fair play. So, as you know, I'm from KPMG. And one of the things we said we could do was to help the world be able to think, particularly the financial, business, and investment community, think about what it is that makes a difference to deliver advantage for the poor. Now, many of you have got mobile phones and iPads. I can see them all the way around the room. Could you go onto the internet if you're internet enabled? Would you mind doing that? Let's see if they really work. And do www.kpmg.com/global goals. See if you can get there. Hands up first, who's got there? Oh, a lady over there, good. Got to the global goal, oh, there, over there, great, fantastic. So it does exist. Great, now go on to the Global Goals site. Global Goals. And you should be able to see the SDG industry matrix for financial services. It's quite a fat document. So it might take a little time just to open it up. What you'll find in it is a compelling, gripping, and exciting array of ideas. Over 300 really clever ideas born from the existing banking and finance institutions of the world, the big systems, the big players, the big networks. It's all there. And what we've tried to do is to put together the best of good experience and to say to the rest of the banking and finance community, how about you adopt the opportunity of the most enabled to empower the greatest number? So let's just have a look at one or two examples. Here is HSBC, large global financial institution working with junior achievement. Many of you know about junior achievement. They're targeting 7 to 11-year-olds, helping them to learn by earning and spending, investing, donating. This is something that John has spoken frequently about, which is learning the early habit of financial literacy. You create credit-abled people by enabling people to understand, in particular, the potency of saved resources. You know, there's a tendency in poor communities for everybody to spend what they have in order just to get the thing that makes them feel good for the day. I mean, that's a common tendency, isn't it? And whether it's from the shoes to the hairdo or whatever it happens to be, then people invest what little they have in looking good for the day, but actually that ain't going to provide routes to freedom. And helping the next generation understand and mentor young men and women through that change is a very important part of powerful financial literacy. Here's another example, Citibank. $2.5 billion pledged on incremental capital towards Power Africa. That's a multi-stakeholder partnership aiming to double the number of people who have access to electricity throughout sub-Saharan Africa, adding so many megawatts of clean and efficient electricity generation to the grid, increasing access to 60 million new homes and businesses. Now, of course, that's a win-win for the bank. It's not a piece of generous philanthropy in its own right. The more empowered people through the electricity grid system, the more inclined people are to use networks of banking and finance. Of course they are. It's a win-win all the way round. But of course it enables the most basic learning and educational tools, which are now so prominently available on the web, to become accessible to those who previously be outside of the system. Here's another example. the Banking Environment Initiative, leading the banking industry to collectively directing capital towards environmentally and socially sustainable economic development, a network of 11 leading banks with over $10 trillion of assets working together to protect the environment. You know, one of the things I saw when I went to Sierra Leone for the first time, and it really struck me, and this was before the Ebola crisis, was getting out of the airport, and then we were driving about 3 hours, and I couldn't see a tree. What had happened to the trees? People had cut them down because they needed them for firewood. And in using them for firewood, of course, what they didn't understand, and it's not their fault, what they didn't understand was that by wrecking the exacting contemporary environment, they were wrecking the environment for the future. In fact, they were removing the very sources that would allow for the transfer of water and vapor through the system, providing for the rains that would secure what they needed for their farming. But they didn't know that. And unless you can empower the poor to know how to protect the environment, they won't necessarily protect their own future. And this, another example on electronic payments. A great network of major organizations working together to enable people to better use electronic access systems. Now, all of these, and I said over 300 different examples, are contained in the SDG matrix. So you've got it there on your global goals, kpmg.com/global goals. Please download it, read it in full. The reason we've done that one, and I'm going to come on to the others in a minute, but the reason we've done that is because when people in the financial community want to say, but look, it's, you know, philanthropy isn't the answer. Giving money away isn't the answer. And we say, no, it isn't the answer. It's about enabling the poor to get access to the resources for which they can make their own decisions. And those resources made available from the existingly well-endowed banking networks and financial groups. Here's one of the most wonderful things that is taking place across the world, which are institutions who are committing very large amounts, multi-trillion-dollar amounts of money under the principles for responsible investment. These are UN-backed guidelines. Proud to say that KPMG helped also to write the latest guideline booklet on that just 2 years ago. You'll notice the figure of 59 major international funds at $8 trillion of assets under management. Now, to give you a sense of perspective, $8 trillion is half the size of the GDP of the US economy. It is 2.5 times the size of the federal budget. The federal budget is about $3.8 trillion, so roughly about 2.5 times that size is the amount of money which is available under these principles for responsible investment. And these are particularly targeted at making sure that the return is not about maximization to individuals or funds, but rather about the impact that is created. And this is a network that is allowing this kind of movement of resources to be focused on improving people's lives as compared to just improving nascent profitability. But let's be upfront about this, and this is something which I know the Hope Forum has long sustained, and I believe, and we believe very strongly, is you can't distance profitability from purpose. You have to link the two. You have to have generously profitable institutions to be able to empower, in particular, the poorest people towards independence. You can't de-link the two. But profit doesn't have to become entirely individually accessible. It can be investable for multitudes, and that's the strategy of thinking encapsulated in PRI. Now, I showed you the opportunities, or I showed you the SDG matrix on financial services. We did a short one on climate opportunities for the COP21 talks, which took place in Paris, and you probably know the agreement that was reached just before Christmas, which is all about constraining carbon irresponsibility. My colleague Catherine Blue, why don't you stand up for a minute, Catherine? She is the US expert on all matters climate and environmental, and if you want to know how to kind of access ways of doing things differently, she's the one to go to, based here in Atlanta. We are also developing matrices based on the following other criteria. The aim is to say there's no industry that is outside of responsibility towards these duties. And the reason we've done this is using the intelligence of our network is to prove, as I said, that these global goals apply to everyone. And they especially, I believe, apply to us. Now, the question is often asked, okay, so it's one thing, you, KPMG, to kind of tell the world what the world should do. What have you done? And here is a little bit of what we've done. Now, you know that KPMG is an audit, tax, and business services institution. There are 3 others, but I won't mention them because I'm not meant to use bad language. But they're great organizers, but I just can't say them. Anyway, we operate in 168 countries around the world with 167,000 people. We're a very large private institution, but we're committed to public good, and that is vital to the DNA of who KPMG is in every sense of the word. And Professor Jeffrey Sachs, many of you will know of Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia University, and also the architect of the writer of the Millennium Development Goals and the writer of the Sustainable Development Goals, challenged KPMG 7 years ago to get involved in a tiny village community in the east, just off the east coast of Africa, off the coast of the country of Tanzania, a little island community called Pemba, just above Zanzibar. The challenge to us was, would you go and take care of the prospects and opportunities and life chances of 10,000 people in a village community that have been disregarded by everybody else, including the government of Tanzania? And I went to visit 7 years ago. This poster you can see was put up by KPMG last year at the World Economic Forum in Davos, which is next week, by the way. But this was at last year's event, Revitalizing Villages. And we saw it as a challenge. How does an audit, tax, and business consultancy organization revitalize villages? It's not what we do. We don't do that. We're not an NGO. We don't make things. We're not UPS who carry bits around the world. We're not Coca-Cola who get into every community with our cans. We're not like that. We produce paper and ideas. That's it. So how would we get engaged, and why would we get engaged? Well, the first task was to find out how to fund it. Here's the little island of Pemba. That's where the village community are. All of these KPMG countries decided they'd get behind the vision. The vision was to raise $2 million to 10,000 people to come out of what was pre-civilization into the prospect of prosperity and secure futures. We began the work 6 years ago. I visit every year in August with a team of our auditors in order to evaluate and assess how the expenditure has gone. It's become a living and breathing passion for us. It's one vivid example, but it is an important vivid example. And here are some of the key achievements. Maybe I'll just read them for the people who are over there in the corner who can't see it. With the new maternity ward, infant and child mortality reduced to 0. We saw last year not one child die in childbirth, not one. When they were dying consistently and regularly before, school attendance up at 68%. It was down less than 30% when we began our work. 3,000 new jobs through the seaweed industry, creating revenues of over $3 million a year. In fact, those revenues are close to $3.8 million at the moment. We're just about to reinvest another $70,000 in the community to get the seaweed farming up to around about a $12 million economy, 4,000 jobs. We believe we can do that over another 2 years. We reforested with 300,000 new trees. 90% of the village has access to safe and clean water. Women's livelihoods and handicrafts are improving outcomes. They're being sold across not just the communities nearby, but also we're importing them to the United States. And we've literally electrified the entire village. Everyone has power. Now, let me show you a couple of pictures. Here are the men from the credit union. They never had a bank before, but here they are literally recording the incomes of people choosing to invest what little they've achieved out of the seaweed farming industry. When we were there in August last year, $300,000 in the bank, in the community. Never had a bank before, didn't know what banks were. Here is what it used to be just like. Very basic, very prehistoric, very pre-civilization. That's the kind of thing you never thought you'd see in the 2000s. That's how it was up until around about 2 years ago. Here is what it is like now, the kind of houses that people are building, the different modern properties that are being constructed. The girls proudly in school, when girls previously in what is a dominantly Muslim community were excluded from school, but we had to work patiently and consistently with the fathers and with the community to convince them of the need to release their girls to learn so that they can learn freedom, sustainability, and economic empowerment for themselves and set themselves free into a course of significance ahead. There it is. You think that's men out there fishing. It's not. It's actually women out there gathering seaweed. And the seaweed was previously just something the community thought was an irritation, because when the men would go out with their boats and try to catch fish, the stuff was getting in the way, and nobody realized what seaweed was. In fact, do you know what you do with seaweed? What do you do with it? It's what? Yeah, you can make thickeners, but what do you thicken every single day you put in your mouth? I hope you do. Toothpaste. I will certainly know if some of you haven't. We'll go around and we can check out the smell factor, but toothpaste. So here are the women bringing the seaweed literally in for drying. They dry it currently on the ground. The new investment we're going to put in is to enable them to dry it above the ground on racks and therefore improve the quality. The women who are making the basket weaving, which previously was of very low quality, we're now able to import those baskets from Pemba Village into the United States and therefore to sell them on. Here's the maternity clinic, which we built to make sure that 3 women are able to give birth in safety and security in clinical conditions with 2 doctors on standby and 3 pharmacists in permanent presence in order to ensure that women are free. Now, why tell you that story? Not just so you can say, isn't KPMG great? But so that you can actually sit there and say, listen, if an audit, tax, and business services organization can do that, what can you do? It is possible to take the toughest communities in the world and bring them into modernity and freedom. It is possible to do that. But what we need in order to achieve that is longevity of commitment, sincerity and due diligence in order to make sure that we make every dollar count. It's no point giving $2 million and watching it wasted. You better stick with it and see it does what it's meant to do. And that money delivers for the poorest, the least, the most inadequate, sets them free and provides them a future. So if you're in manufacturing, it's easy. If you're in services, it's tough. But if service organizations can now be proved to do it, manufacturers can be even better. If we can do it, a bank and a finance institution can do it. A private equity network can do it. An insurance network can do it. We can't pretend there's any community outside of which we cannot provide the prospect of prosperity and dignity. Now, one of the great organizations that we partner with is called Enactus, and I wanted to show you some wonderful examples of what students do to empower the poor. We're going to start off with Mukhtar Kent, of course, who's a local to this town. Mukhtar Kent is the chairman, chief executive of the Coca-Cola Company. Let's have a look at what he believes Enactus students have done from Germany in sub-Saharan Africa that I think we could also help to do. And then we'll look at Kees Krijthoff, who is the head of Unilever for North America. And then we'll see an example that comes from Doug McMillan, who is the president and CEO of Walmart. So these are 3 big guys talking to the poorest, most disadvantaged, with real practical examples.
In too many parts of our world, vision problems that are actually easy to remedy are contributing to low literacy rates and high levels of unemployment. Without access to affordable optical care, people with poor vision struggle to break out of that vicious cycle of poverty. So, how do you provide ongoing access to the care of these people at a price they can afford? By teaching their neighbors to become micro-opticians, diagnosing common vision problems, and manufacturing properly fitted glasses for less than $1, providing an essential service to their communities while also earning a sustainable livelihood for themselves. This solution wasn't the work of a big company or a government agency. No, it was the wonderful idea of a team of visionary university students from Germany. Enactus encouraged these students to see opportunity where others saw challenges and to take action by creating an innovative business model for delivering the life-changing gift of vision to people in need. As a member of Enactus, I'm proud to support these inspiring students as they use their passion and as they use their talents to make the world a better place. To become a member, please visit enactus.org.
We take illumination for granted, but there are those who resort to dangerous methods just to shed light on their daily tasks. In rural communities in India, interior rooms have no access to light, even in broad daylight. Plastic bottles refract light. What if you filled one with water and add a chlorine tablet? Poke it through a hole in the roof and it will give off a glorious glow. By harnessing the sun's energy, thousands of people can have access to indoor lighting. Brilliant. Not my bright ideas, though. A group of university students figured it out. Can you believe it? Working as an Enactus team, the students stepped into their entrepreneurial spirit and repurposed discarded bottles, converting them into an inexpensive and readily available light source. It's that thinking that will ensure a bright future for the world and steer the future of business in the right direction. To become a member, visit enactus.org.
Our communities are besieged by complex and ever-evolving problems. Take unemployment and waste management, two common issues the world over. By tackling one, can we impact the other? Let's start with those mattresses. Did you know that a mattress is about 85% recyclable? Now consider that enough mattresses are discarded annually to sustain a dedicated workforce. Workers break the mattresses down, then sell the materials for recycling. Two community problems addressed with a simple yet brilliant idea. I'd love to tell you it was mine, but no, it was university students, a team of university students who conceived it and executed it. Brought together by Enactus, these students built a business out of recycling old mattresses that now provides employment and hope for disadvantaged workers. That's the type of thinking that assures me that no matter how bad things get, there are people who can make a real difference in this world. To become a member, visit enactus.org.
Now, I saw some of you going, wow. Simple solutions, deliverable outcomes, change lives. And they haven't come from big academics or bright spark innovators, but they've come from students. So what could you do? Well, the first thing you could do is to join enactus.org. It's a US-based organization, headquartered in the US, but working now in 36 countries around the world. We're proud to be the event sponsor for the World Cup event, which takes place every year in different locations. This last year it was in Johannesburg. Next year it's in Toronto, and the year after it's back in London, but it's been in Mexico, it's been all over the place. We're proud to be involved, as KPMG are, in 30 of the 36 countries, leading the board and supporting with thousands of mentors who get alongside the students. Could you be a mentor to get alongside students who are literally in every corner of the United States, in almost every major institution or university you'll find an Enactus program. And by working with them, you get to empower opportunities that change the prospects of the poor. There are real things everybody can do. Nobody needs to feel that these things are outside of our potential. That just tells you something of the reach of countries and networks that there are. Here is just a set of figures to show how different aspects of Enactus's work deliberately impact on the issues that are facing people in sub-Saharan Africa in particular. But here's the interesting chart too. All of these are sponsoring, paying, committed companies. Now, you'll recognize many of them. Many of them are US companies, but many of them are international corporations. There isn't a reason why anyone can't be engaged and involved. So it comes back to the question at the end, which is raised by these 17 remarkable targets. Do you believe, are you cynical enough free to believe, cynicism enough free to believe that we can see the eradication of extreme poverty and hunger by 2030? Is it possible? Is it possible? The Millennium Development Goals got us halfway. The challenge of that film was, are we going to sit there and say halfway was good enough? Are we going to commit to get the other half done? The place where the greatest need remains is still in sub-Saharan Africa, where the largest numbers of people in extreme poverty are growing rather than declining. In China, the numbers are down. In India, the numbers are down. In Latin America, the numbers are down. In Southeast Asia, the numbers are down. In Africa, the numbers are up. One of the reasons for that is because of a ballooning population. The population of the continent is set to go from currently 800 million people at the moment, near 1 billion people. That's nearly 3.5 times the size of the US population, is set to go from that to roughly 2.5 billion people by 2150. That is phenomenal. There will be more Nigerians in the world by 2100 than there are people in the United States. Estimated growth to 400 million Nigerians. So if we want to really make a difference, is where poverty is gripplingly real and cripplingly present. We need to get ourselves into a perspective of thinking beyond our borders, looking outside. You've seen from the film at the beginning, you can become a global citizen. Join the global citizen movement. Go on the web, join the global citizen movement. It matters how many people are part of it, and you get the directional guidance. Stick on the kpmg.com/global goals website. You'll get all the other matrices as they come out. Particularly download the one on financial services and look at all the case study examples that are there. Ask whether your company, your institution, your network could do something like we did. And I say, you know, if auditors and tax advisors can do what we've done and consistently seek to do and do, in reality, anyone can do it. And particularly those who have leveraged finance are able to invest in the poorest companies. And then also join enactus.org. I've just given you 4 routes to progress, but they're just 4 routes to progress. There are multitudes of them. But what we've got to have is a perspective that says, actually, we're not prepared to let the extreme prosperity of the North stay just in the North. Because actually, whether we like it or not, the people of the destitute South are heading our way. And they're not going to come here and smile at us. They're going to come here because they're angry, they're hungry, and they're sick. So if we want to change that paradigm, we've got to get determined and progressive and proactive and involved. But it's a justice issue more than anything else. And what this template does is give us all the reasons why we should